I think if he tries to learn Power BI, the basics of it, maybe just the visualization. If you have the cleaned data, you just inject that data into Power BI and you can create the visualization. I think that won't take more than 7 days for any beginner also. So what is the complexity? Like, where is the expertise that comes
Excel
in?
can handle, the data model in Excel can handle, I don't know, I did a demo with 25 million records. I often do a little demo with 5 million rows loaded into Excel, because the data model, technically 2 billion distinct values.
Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome to the new episode of Analytics Unplugged Podcast, where we do conversations with experts. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Wyn Hopkins. Wyn Hopkins has a wide experience on Power BI, Excel. He has been working in this field from past 15 to 16 years, and he's a MVP. He is author, he's a speaker, and currently director at Access Analytic in Western Australia. So I would like to introduce him to all of you. Welcome, Wyn, to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Greatly
Great.
appreciate the invite.
Great. So I have been following you since along. I was watching your videos on YouTube on the page Access Analytics. You used to explain about Power BI, Power Query, DAX, new features. So the journey has been quite challenging, very interesting. So can you share your journey with the audience, like how you came across Power BI? It's been, I think Power BI was launched in, I think, 2015. So it's been almost 10 years, right?
I know.
And yeah. So tell us your journey, how you came across Power BI, how you thought it can be a big thing, and you have been working on Power BI projects since then.
Yeah, sure. So, I was the Excel guy in the companies that I worked for. I was that person that everyone went to for their Excel help.
Yeah.
Because I'm an ex-accountant. So I was a financial accountant working for banks in the UK, using Excel to do forecasting and working for strategy and planning for, build out your 5-year forecast, profit profiles, all that sort of stuff. Heavy Excel user. Had a bit of a knack for it. Thought I knew it all. And this was when I was about, I don't know, 20 years ago. I thought I knew it all. And joined Access Analytic in Perth. So I was from the UK, but I moved to Perth 18 years ago. And yeah, sort of did a search for financial modeling, Excel, Perth, and this company called Access Analytic popped up. And they're a full-time professional Excel development and training company, basically using finance people who are good at Excel and stuff, and operational people. I realized I knew about 30% of Excel once I actually met those people. So it was like, right, you know what you know, okay. So that was the start of it. And then working with that company, working with clients and building reporting solutions and analysis solutions using Excel. And at the time, a lot of VBA to then automate reporting, build ad hoc analysis, build things that were meant to last a month or 2 months, but then lasted 6 or 7 years or 10 years, that sort of thing. And yeah, so VBA heavy. Then Power Pivot, the precursor to Power BI, came along and got built into Excel back in 2009. I think it was an add-in, 2010. Then Power Query came along, previewed in around 2011 as an add-in for Excel, got built into Excel in Excel 2016. So these tools, we were building solutions for clients. We were speeding up their reporting from 1 hour for their reports to refresh to 4 seconds with 5 years worth of data.
Amazing.
Just mind-blowing, right? Just transformational what was possible. So that was the big shift. And then Power BI, the Power BI team said, I think James Phillips was in charge at the time, said, look, we can't update Excel quick enough to do as many updates as we want to. So we have to take out this Power Pivot and Power Query feature, put it into a separate tool, Power BI Desktop, and we can then update it monthly. We'll have no guarantee of backwards compatibility, which isn't something you can do with Excel. You just can't say your Excel report's going to start, you just have to update. So you've got to keep updated with Power BI. And we just came with that journey then. So our company, there's 10 of us now. We spend most of our time building Power BI solutions for clients, running
Right.
training around the world, in Perth, in Australia. So that's where our sort of business is. And we've sort of gone into budgeting and forecasting and financial modeling and that side of things. But really the Power BI stuff is where the big growth area has been in the business.
That's amazing. So as you were saying, like mostly that you're working on Power BI related things, solutions providing to the clients. So I would say, for example, if there is a newbie, a beginner in this field, and he just started Power BI, I think if he tries to learn Power BI, the basics of it, maybe the just the visualization. If you have the cleaned data, you just inject that data into Power BI and you can create the visualization. I think that won't take more than 7 days for any beginner also. So what is the complexity, like where is the expertise that comes in, where the people resources like you, like all the
Yeah, yeah.
seniors come in, like what is the main thing that comes into Power BI, where the expertise comes in, where all the beginners should move into?
Yeah. So all your time is spent in the getting your data. Okay.
Yeah.
If you've got somebody who's built a nice SQL database for you with views that have got all the data you need in, all laid out nicely, then building Power BI reports, it's pretty straightforward. Again, you need to have the time and just know, how to present data and how to set up the Power BI environment and the best ways of sharing. So there's expertise in terms of, we're only experts because we've made all the mistakes. So
Yeah.
that's what expertise is. It's about paying for somebody not to do the mistakes that you would do and learn the hard way and the long way.
Right.
So we've learned from the mistakes. We now know the sort of the ways to set things up, what might happen if you do it this way or that way. So you're really paying for somebody to build it in a robust manner that is built quickly and is impactful in terms of your reporting. So there's still the element of what makes a good report, what should you include, what's useful, what's not. So there's those elements. So that's a whole piece on its own if you have nice clean data. Whereas
Yeah.
I think I know one client that's got a dedicated BI team that is building nice curated SQL databases for the rest of the business. One out of, like, I've been doing this for 17 years now.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it doesn't really happen in real life. So your time is spent grabbing all these bits of data from everywhere and realizing you're missing stuff, and then realizing the way it was reported before wasn't quite right, or that there was this little exception that gives you 10 hours of work rather than 1 hour of work if that exception didn't exist. It's all
Right.
those little bits and pieces, but it's the data, getting the data in, getting it organized. That's where all the hard work and effort normally is.
Right. So as you were saying, like the major chunk of time is spent on collecting the data. For example, we have data coming from number of data sources. For example, it is coming from
Yeah.
SAP, it can come from Dynamics, it can come from any third party tool, it can come from anywhere. We can use API to extract the data, we can use the connectors that we already have in Power BI, or we can use any other thing. So we have multiple data sources. Now we have multiple data that we have. How we are making sure that it is marrying to each other. For example, there is one column which is same in two tables coming from different data sources. We know that these two columns should be same, but somehow it is not same. So how do you make sure that it is joining together properly, or what are the things that you feel are generally the basic challenges for each and every client, anything that you have in mind?
Yeah, that sort of, that source of truth, the source of, the main source of data. I think
Yeah.
this is where Power BI sort of moves away from Excel and is better in that extent. I'm a massive Excel fan, still love it.
Yeah.
Power BI does not replace Excel. It just does different things. It does a lot of the same, but you can do different things.
Right.
And I think that centralization piece with Power BI is the big difference. So you can actually pull in data from, what the business has agreed is the right source, and then you can store that centrally for other people to access. in two different ways, purely looking at Power BI. This is pre-Fabric sort of world. So you can either sort of create the data source in your model, which is where all the tables are curated, linked together. You've written your metrics or measures and formulas and stuff. And that's the sort of truth that you can then potentially give other people access to build their own visualizations off. So there's this agreed sort of, data comes in from this source, it's in here, and that is it. And you can mark these things as certified as well. So certain people can have permission to mark these models as certified. So that's one method. The other method is you've got Power Query Online. So Power Query tables, data flows as they're known. So you can store the tables, individual tables, centrally, and again, give people access so that you've done the data cleansing and they're stored there centrally. Now, if you've got a DBA or a database admin or somebody an IT team that are building you centralized SQL databases and views, that's the ideal. That's perfect.
Yeah.
There's no need to build data flows and stuff essentially. But for smaller organizations or people without that resource or people slowly migrating in that path, those stepping stones are, that data flow stepping stone, having the data centrally is the key. And then it's about just validating. You've got to validate the data. And I would say nowhere near all the time, but very often you discover that the old reports were wrong because no one did the validation on the old reports.
Yeah. And also, I believe your domain expertise will also come into picture when you're doing all this sort of cleaning and transformation, or it's not that important?
Well, validating the results, that's where the domain knowledge comes in. What doesn't look reasonable, when you're spitting a result out. There are traps along the way. Like, let's say you join two tables in Power Query. If one of the tables has got a duplicate record ID in it, it'll double up the data when you do the merge. So you've always got to do like a remove duplicates before you do the merge and stuff like that to really make it a bit more bulletproof. And you might not notice that something's just, got $1 million. You might not notice that $50,000 has been doubled up. But if it's doubled up everything, you're going to know if you've got, an understanding of the business and an awareness. And also just building that model, building that how this data links to that data and what that means and what's important. That's where the business knowledge, the domain knowledge and stuff comes in around, the business logic about how everything works.
Right. So you talked about Fabric. We'll come to Fabric as well. But before that, I just want to ask one thing. You are Excel expert. As you said, you love Excel still. Like now we are in Power BI era, but still you love Power BI. And I know many things are done on Power BI, which can't be done anywhere. In Excel, which can't be done anywhere else. So can you tell me 5 important techniques or formulas or anything which are really important in Excel? For example, if you have to interview someone for advanced analytics in Excel, so what are the 5 things you would want him to know in Excel?
So Power Query. So that's Excel's by far Excel's best feature for anybody who's in the analytics space. So Power Query for getting your data in and reorganizing it. Really, ideally, you'd know about Power Pivot and the data model in Excel because it's the same thing as Power BI's data model. Not exactly the same thing, but to the untrained eye, it looks identical. And then just other elements about sort of like just structuring things, just being aware that organized tables are the key to making your analysis easier. If your data isn't in nice tables, then you're just making hard work for yourself. So, Excel has a concept called tables, Control T to create tables. If you haven't learned about those, then you're just way back in terms of how efficient you can be in your analysis. So those are sort of the 3 things. And then some of the new stuff is like dynamic arrays. So in Excel, so you can make formulas dynamic so that they expand as the data expands. So you're never forgetting to drag a formula down. And you're not having to manually do that sort of formula updates, and just pivot table reporting, stuff like that. If you're not comfortable with pivot tables, again, the same sort of logic goes into building matrix visuals and table visuals and charts in Power BI. So the two skill sets really overlap a lot.
Yeah. Sometime back, someone asked me if VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, index matching, is it still important? Like, do we should know, working on these formulas, or it's not important? What do you think? Is it still relevant in industry?
Yeah. So, I'd strongly recommend XLOOKUP to replace all those.
Yeah.
Sort of, I'm a bit biased because I sort of came up with the initial concept of XLOOKUP and campaigned about it for about 3 years on LinkedIn. Got lots of people to vote on Excel user voice, and then eventually the Microsoft Excel team went, "Oh yeah, we can actually build that. We'll do it." So then they built XLOOKUP. So I've got a little bit of sort of
Bias,
interest in the formula, but honestly, it was there because VLOOKUP was just a bit dangerous because it had that hard-coded column referencing. And if people inserted columns, things broke. Index match was a bit hard for people to learn. So we just wanted a simple version, which XLOOKUP is.
Yeah. It's
and it looks left and looks right. But in terms of you could use Power Query merges instead of XLOOKUP. You can do joins in tables instead of XLOOKUP. So which should you use? Depends on the scenario, right? If you're building a financial forecast, you don't need a data model. You don't need Power Query necessarily. You just want to look up some prices and some rates from some table and be able to manipulate them. And then your cash flow forecast changes, or you're just doing some ad hoc analysis, or you're just building a simple little 2-page report. You don't want to over-engineer these things. So XLOOKUP, I'm still using it, in reports, building things for clients in Excel that use XLOOKUP, and I use that these days. I don't use sort of index match or VLOOKUPs. I've never been a VLOOKUP fan. But then, well, I won't get into that conversation. Otherwise, the ghost of Oz de Soleil will jump up and sort of come and start nagging me. But it's horses for courses, right? So it depends. It depends. So all got their place.
Amazing. So secondly, there was one more thing about the number of rows, or we say data size. So if we work on Excel or Power BI, what is the number of rows? I think it's 10 lakhs, if I'm not wrong, that we can have.
Inside, so Excel sheet has got a limit of 1,045,000 rows or something like that.
Yeah. So if we are working on Power BI as well, so what do you think, how much, you are working with so many clients, on an average, how many rows are there for your data that you're working on? Like from industrial expertise that we are thinking
for
of?
our clients, we tend to deal with departments within larger organizations. So we're not at the IT enterprise grade sort of, data warehousing type set. That's not been our sort of focus in the past. Fabric, as we'll mention later, I think is a pathway for us to start sort of developing there. So Power BI sort of data sets, we're dealing with maybe a couple of million records. Often 50,000, 100,000, 500,000, for that sort of space.
On an average, it would be somewhere around 1 million.
Yeah, let's say. And Excel can handle, the data model in Excel can handle, I don't know, I did a demo with 25 million records. I often do a little demo with 5 million rows loaded into Excel, because the data model, technically 2 billion distinct values in one column. That's the limit. So not number of records, just how much compute power your computer has is the limit, really. And Power BI, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's quite a cool demo where they do a quarter of a petabyte of data with 2 trillion records, slicing and dicing in Power BI, which is pretty cool. So yeah, but there's no real data limit. It's just your computing size and how long you want to sit there for the report to refresh. Your patience is more the limit than the actual number of records.
True. So now coming back to the more important stuff, like last year, there was a launch of Microsoft Fabric, and many people who are already working on Power BI, they are a bit hesitant to go towards Fabric. Many people I know, they are not able to understand what actually Fabric is solving. Maybe it's like an integration. We are doing all kind of analytics at one place. It's a platform from Microsoft. So I want to know from you, what exactly is Fabric and what is Fabric solving for the developers or for the audience?
Sure. So, it is pretty new and there's a lot to take in. Um, I'll share my screen in a second, but just sort of conceptually, what we're saying is, look, Power BI has been this online service that you can share reports from, store your data there, refresh your data, do all that sort of stuff in the browser via powerbi.com. And there were these other tools dotted around, Microsoft tools for enterprise level data ingestion, automating the process, storing the data. There were all these different buckets. And what Microsoft had done with Fabric is just bring all those together into the Power BI space. So it's a familiar experience with anybody who's been using Power BI, but they've brought all those separate services together. I'll share my screen now and just sort of mention about the sort of elements that are in here. So
That will
if you
be
want to
great.
just bring, so
Yeah.
did I need to, hold on, let me just
Yeah.
share
Yeah.
this a second. Here we go. And that one. Okay. Cool. So look, we're into sort of powerbi.com, and this is an empty workspace. So down the side here in Power BI, you can go to workspaces and you can just create different workspaces and things. Okay. And a workspace is like a folder, and that's where you store your Power BI content. You can publish your Power BI report. You can share your report from there. So this is the Power BI world. Okay. I've been used to for the last 8 years. Nothing's really changed there. But if you have a Fabric trial, which your admin has to turn on, here's my Fabric trial, I get access to a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay, so down here, I've got this Microsoft Fabric, which consists of various other elements. And if I go into Microsoft Fabric here, this is really the core bits now. So Power BI, still part of Fabric, hasn't changed, right? If you don't even know about Fabric and you've been using Power BI, just carry on using Power BI, right? There's no difference, apart from the fact you'll see the little letter F pop up now and again when you log in, and also the free users for Power BI. They used to have a Power BI free license. They now relabeled it Fabric free. Okay,
Right.
so that's about it, right? But then what you've got are these other elements that have now, they used to be still are separate tools, but they've also now put versions inside this one space. And the nice thing about it is they all share a common layer called OneLake. Think of it like OneDrive, where you can store all your data, and all these sort of services can access that data level. And the real big bet by Microsoft here, one of the reasons they're doing this is, one, to simplify the whole thing. So rather than having to license 7 different things for bringing your data in, organizing it, doing machine learning, rather than only having these separate things you have to spin up with separate licensing and separate permissions and trying to link data to different spots, they put it all in one place, one sort of fee, essentially, depending on how much compute power you pay for, and it's just simpler. So that's really the process. And also, with all your data in one spot, in one lake, what it means is that the AI, as you know, Microsoft's going all in on CoPilot. Okay, it's a big investment. They really see CoPilot as the future. Having all your data in one spot means the AI can access it if you give it permission to, and you'll get way more beneficial, more useful results from CoPilot, rather than CoPilot having to go and look in lots of different places, which would be quite hard to actually manage and set up. So that's the concept. And then, these elements like Data Factory is a way of sort of essentially running data flows, which is Power Query Online. So data flow Gen 2, which is basically Power Query in the cloud. But it can load data to the lakehouse, which is essentially a way of just storing your data inside one lake in what's termed Delta Parquet files, which is a bit techy, but essentially, you can store files as CSVs, you can store files as Excel, you can store files in all sorts of different ways. Delta Parquet is awesome for just storing data in a really accessible, compressed format. So you can actually, that sort of file format is then the standard. And then data pipelines is just a way of orchestrating stuff. So you can say, at a certain time, go do this, then grab the data, then delete the data from there, load it here. And you can just create these sort of pipelines and things. So it's really bringing all these services that were separate services together into this Power BI environment, if you like. So they're basically stealing, the user interface, so it feels familiar and nice. So you can build a pipeline activity, and lots of this stuff is new terminology to me. I'm not a IT background; I'm a finance background. But the more you read it, the more you look at it, it's pretty straightforward. So you can just build something, and then you can sort of add certain tasks, and you can link them together, and you can schedule stuff, and you can run things and put things on certain times, and then chain certain events together with these little sort of links and things. So yeah, it's just about, pulling all that stuff together. And then for those of people interested in or know about Python, then we've got the data engineering section here. And you can actually create notebooks. Okay, and you can use notebooks to clean up your data. You can write Python to clean up your data and load the data into the lakehouse or into a data warehouse. And all these things are then accessible by Power BI. So it's like bringing lots of these enterprise grade tools that were completely out of the reach of, the general business user, and to some extent still are, but really simplifies it for those people who are into the data engineering, into Python, into all these elements. It's just so simple, much simpler for those people now to get into this and start writing code and building solutions without having to know how to spin up different environments and different Azure services and all this sort of stuff. It's just all in one spot.
That's amazing. I mean, we have just one location and we can do everything there.
Yeah. And if I have a look at this, let me go into one I've built for a demo or something. Here we go. And I'll just go into a lake house here just to show you sort of what it looks like. Because it's not, all of it's on its face, all of it's quite simple looking. The concept, the difficulty is how do you pull everything together and how do you learn all the different bits? There's a lot, there's too much to learn in a year. It's just you've got to start chipping away at bits. But essentially you can have your files, your raw files in certain folders. And then that can be, that's not a very good example. Let me do a better one than that. This one will be better. So you can have your raw data files, which you can upload, your CSVs, your Excel files, whatever. So those files can be potentially in here, and you can say upload some files, or you can use Power Query or a notebook to pull in your data from somewhere, and then that data can get loaded into these little Delta Parquet files. So that's that's the actual, they're essentially they're tables. So here's my table, and they're stored efficiently, and that's the little symbol for a Delta Parquet file. So it's really just storing your data in a nice, accessible format, which is a very similar format to how Power BI stores the data when you suck the data in. So Power BI loves this sort of stuff. You can even connect to it directly. It's called Direct Lake. So you don't necessarily have to import your data into Power BI. If you've got huge data sets, you can just link to this and build your Power BI reports. So these pieces coming together, it's just they're pretty exciting, but there's just lots to learn.
Yeah. I mean, there is one more way when we used to get data from SQL servers. So we used to create a direct query link and we never imported the data set into Power BI. And I think this is similar to that. So now we don't have to load our data into Power BI, and we can still work on data and generate the visuals so that we can create the dashboards without loading the data. So that's a very good thing.
There's two other elements that they've sort of announced fairly recently, which is shortcuts and mirroring. So
Yeah.
shortcuts, the data stays in the data source, and the shortcut or the data appears as if it's in OneLake, in your lake house. It looks like it's there. You can see it. You can query it. You can connect to it with Power BI, but actually it lives. It hasn't moved. It's basically like a redirect to the actual
Hmm.
data source. That's shortcuts. And then they recently announced mirroring, where you actually you pull all the data in from your external data source, like Amazon or Google or somewhere like that, S3 databases. So it pulls the data in, stores it, which Microsoft are not going to charge you for, which is quite cool. They're not going to charge you for
Yeah.
mirroring storage, which is pretty
Yeah.
generous.
Yeah.
And then it just refreshes almost live to the data source, but only incrementally. Only the new records are updated. So then again, you're querying the data really fast because it's living in your OneLake, in your lake house somewhere. And
Yeah.
then it's just keeping up to date from that sort of whatever your external sources, and they're adding more sources as you go. So yeah, it's amazing how much is going to change over the next, well, it's going to be monthly. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, there is a great tutorial, I guess, from Microsoft on Fabric. If someone wants to go through,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
share the link and people can go for that. And coming back to one more interesting thing in Power BI, that is DAX. So I know
Mm,
many people, they shy away from DAX, learning DAX, because it's not that easy, to be honest.
yeah.
Just the basic stuff, it's fine. Like if you have to do some average, min, max of calculate or all those things, those are easy stuff. But if we go beyond that, it's not that easy. The learning curve is slightly exponential. It's not easy for
Yeah.
anyone, any beginner at least, to learn DAX. So how important DAX is, and any tips from your end, like how we can learn DAX in more efficient manner.
Yeah. So what I say to people is, it's all about filter. Power BI is all about filters, and DAX is all about filters as well. Um, so the concept is you've got these tables that are being filtered, and then you're summing or counting, the filtered results. Um, and you think of a filter maybe like, a slicer or a drop down or something like that. But other visuals can filter each other. So that's another set of filters. The row labels or the axis of a chart or the legend of a chart, they're all filters. So you've got to just start thinking about everything in terms of data being filtered. And then the thing that sort of just blows your mind with DAX is that DAX formulas, they just do aggregations, sums, counts, averages, as you mentioned. But where it gets sort of hard to picture in your brain is that DAX formulas can also change the filters.
Yeah.
So it's all about getting your head around what filters do you need to apply, remove, or change to get the number you're after. The
Yeah.
classic example being, the percentage of a grand total. So this is, red items, and it's the percentage of the total items. I want to say it's 10% of the total. Well, how do you do that? And that's where it's sort of you've got to say, right, well, how do I, when I'm filtering for red, how do I unfilter for red in order to get the total and then divide by
Right.
that number? And that's where your knowledge of DAX has to sort of come in to go, right, well, how do I write a DAX formula that can get rid of the filter for red to give me the total at that point? So then I can divide by it. And it's those sorts of things that it's hard. And it's also made harder by the fact that people don't necessarily set up their data models right. And if your data model's wrong, then DAX becomes really hard. Okay.
Yeah.
So quite often, messy, hard DAX is the result of your data model not being set up right. Or you just might need one helper column in Power Query just to make your DAX go from 20 lines to 2 lines. So it can
Yeah.
be, it's a combination of knowing where to apply stuff. It is important, right? DAX is important. You don't want to be pre-calculating everything before the data gets pulled in. That's how the old BI tools used to work. It's not how Power BI likes to work. And you also, you lock yourself into, if you do your calcs sort of before the data gets pulled in, you can't slice and dice as easily. You can't suddenly go, well, what was it for last month and location rather than cost center? Or what was it for this person or that person's department? You can't quickly analyze your data. That's the beauty of DAX. It just speeds up how quickly you can make changes, slice and dice, rather than pre-calculating it in views and stuff before the data gets loaded.
Yeah. So one more thing in features of Power BI. So if you have to, for example, calculate the total revenue, so that will be a multiplication of the price of a product
Mm.
versus the quantity, right? So for that, we can either use calculate measure or we can use calculate column, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So in calculate column, we so there is added column and data is stored in the database, right? But in calculate measure, which is done by DAX, so we are not storing anything because that's just a formula. So what do you
Yes.
think? What is more preferable, and what are the pros and cons of either of them? Like from your
Yeah.
experience?
And I can sort of show the concept as well.
Yeah.
But it's really a case of going, avoid calculated columns if you can. And there's generally two ways of avoiding it. There's writing a formula instead, or adding that column in Power Query, or even ideally adding it back in your SQL database or wherever your data is coming from. Right? Most clients, talk about SQL databases, most clients I deal with are dealing with Excel files, CSV files, web queries, API calls, all that sort of stuff. Some have nice SQL databases, but generally there's all sorts, even if they do, there's other data sources coming from Excel and all these other places. So it's really a case of just organizing your data and adding those columns in Power Query, or ideally, if you can avoid that, add your calculation using a measure instead. So yeah, it might be worth me just showing quickly a concept in here. And
Sure.
I'll just do one other thing here too. I'm just going to set up this little table. I'm going to use that example. You just use a price. So let me just open this up. Where was the price one? This one. Oops, not that one. Hold on, let me open a different one up. 1 second. So I've got this sort of table here, and I'm just going to add a price into. I'm just going to show you some of the mistakes as well, or some of the issues.
Yeah.
But I've got this little table here. Here we go. I've called this animals. Let's say how much feed they need. Okay, feed price. Okay, and let's say ants, it's $1. For a bull, it's $100, and for a cat, it's $5. All right, so whatever it might. This is my little dimension table. I'm just going to close that down and save. All right. So what I've done is, this is a bad example because somebody's pulled this in, me, but I'm just sort of pretending to be bad. And they've pulled in separate months. I see this sometimes. They pull in separate months or separate years into their report, which is not the way to do it. Your DAX is going to be very hard if you want to get a total for the quarter or a total for the year. So you basically want to change this to be one appended table. And I also see people, even when they do append it, they still load these three tables in, which is not what you want. You want to make your model as simple as possible. So to pull one of these in, I just went to Excel workbook and connected to that Excel workbook and pulled the table in. I won't go into that exactly, but if I go back into the Power Query here and bring this screen across, let me just drag that over. Okay. So here's my sort of three tables, January, and all it's done is gone to the Excel file and sucked the data in for January. I did the same thing for a file called February. I did the same thing for a file called March. I just sucked in the three different tables. But what you should do is not load these. So disable a load of these. It's going to say, hey, there's going to be, the data is about to disappear. So this means that the data doesn't end up in the model, okay, from these individual tables, which is not, because I don't want those three separate tables. I want to append them. So I can just simply go, click on one of them, come up to the top here, okay, up into the append queries, and I can use as new Okay, so append queries as new. And then I'll just say, if you want to do 3 or more tables, I want January's already there, February and March. And again, there's different ways of doing this, but this is the sort of simplest to explain in this sort of environment. You can automate this. You can do it from a folder to automatically stack everything from a folder. So there's my 3 tables. And this is now my sort of, maybe this is my feed data for my animal feed. Okay. And it's this table that I load, not these 3. So I can just click close and load then up the top here. So close and apply.
Yep.
And here comes my data. And these 3 tables will disappear. And I've now got one nice table. Okay.
Amazing.
Which I can then link up to my calendar. You should always have a calendar. You can download one we got free ones on our website. You can Google it. You can do one via DAX. I always build my calendar table using Power Query, but you really need one if you want to slice and dice your data by year, month, quarter, financial year, all that sort of stuff. So it really helps. So with this, I then want to analyze that cost. So I'm going to go to my Excel workbook, bring in that animal mapping dimension. Okay, bring that in, which had the price in. And where we're going with this is we're going to use that table to multiply the quantity of feed by the price, okay, without having to create a physical column. So I'll always say transform just in case, but here we go. That probably would have been fine to load, but let's just jump in here. Okay, all good. Columns look okay. This code column is going to end up linking to this item code column. And this can be called my, animal feed dimension or something like that, animal feed table. These got your fact tables with all your facts and figures in, the quantities, the big tables. Then you've got your dimension tables that have extra information that you want to slice and dice your data by, like by animal type or by feed price or whatever. So I'm going to go close and apply. And it should load in, and it may connect up automatically. It might not because the labels are different, but I can just drag and drop. And there I've created a nice little dimensional model. And these ones are just extras for demos and things that I do. So there's my nice model. Okay. It's called a semantic model now. It used to be called a data set. Right. So how do I work out? Let me go here. I want to just build a simple little measure. So right click, new measure. To say, let's say kilograms of feed. Okay, kilogram. Let me zoom in a bit as well. So control mouse wheel, kilograms of feed. And this is the simple DAX. It's the sum of the feed data amount column. Feed data amount. Okay, probably should have named that something better than amount. So that's my how much feed. And I can go kilograms of feed. It comes in as a chart. And I can simply use my linked table now to analyze that by animal. Okay. And then I've got a blank going on. So what I want to do is pull in the animal from the feed data. I pull in my item code. Here's all my different codes. I click on that. And I realize that I haven't got mapping for these items.
Yeah.
So I would go back into my lookup table. I've only got 3 records. I've got to add another 6 or 7 or 8, codes for each of these because these are meaning something. But let's say, for example, just to make it the demo work a bit nicer, I'm just going to go back into Power Query. And this is the iterative piece of the thing when you're building reports. You never nail the data first time. So I'm going to go back into my feed data. And let's say I'm comfortable. I know that I'm allowed just to pick A1, B1, and C1. Okay. For whatever reason, I'm happy that all the other data doesn't matter. Okay. So that's my actual data now. If I go close,
we just filtered the data for ABC.
Yeah. So that's I'm saying for some reason, I'm happy that for this reporting, I'm only interested in those 3 codes. So there we go. That's my codes and that's my table. Right. So that's the quantity of feed. I can turn that into a matrix and zoom in here a bit. Okay. And I can go up to here, click on my measure, click on the little comma, change it to, it's probably already a whole number, I think. Yeah. So there we go, kilograms. So I want to do how much revenue or how much cost. So I want to multiply that by the price. And this is where DAX, you go, oh, how do I do that? Do I need to go and merge the tables, bring the price column in, then multiply one column by another column? Well, no. So what you can do, well, I could do this, and this is the sort of best way of explaining the measure, is to actually go in here and go to my feed data. And just to demonstrate, I'm going to create a new column. So this is a physical column. As you say, it takes up memory, it takes up space. Power BI likes narrow tables. So if you can avoid adding a column like I'm about to, then you should. Okay. But we're going to go here and we're going to say, let's go col for column price equals related. So if 2 tables are linked, you can use the related function to bring back the price. Okay, now if I search for price, oh, there you go.
Is it similar to lookup in Excel?
Yeah, so there is a lookup function as well that doesn't need the relationship, but your queries and everything will work slower if you do that. If you can have a relationship, then related is like a VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so here's the price. Okay, there we go. Lovely. And then we can add another column. And I'm showing you this, but I'm saying don't do it this way. Right? So then we have the sort of cost, or you mentioned revenue, but I'm doing it the other way around, which is simply the feed data, and always put the table name. Good tip, best practice. Always put the table name if you're referring to a column. Okay, it would allow me just to write amount or whatever that might be, but always refer to the column times feed data column price. Okay, so that's and I could just put that in a measure or drop it on my page, and that's my cost. But I've added 2 columns. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I could do a merge in Power Query and do that multiplication back there. Might be a better approach, but the best approach would be not to do any of that at all. The best approach would be, for this scenario, is just to go right click, new measure. Okay. And we're going to go cost measure, just to differentiate it, equals, and then shift enter whenever you want to start a new line in DAX. So the sum x function, the x functions are iterator functions, which means they run down every row of a table. The best way to think about it is like you're actually adding another column to the table temporarily. The x function, think of the x function as add a column and run down. That's what the x bit means. And at the end of it doing something for every row in that column, at the end, it'll sum it. That's what the sum part does. So it's almost like in a measure replicating what I just did, but in a measure rather than actually physically adding columns. So the sum x, okay, it needs the name of a table. So the table I want to run down, let me just come down here, was the feed data table. Okay. And for every row of that table, I want to take the feed data amount and multiply it by the related price, animal feed dimension price. Yeah, so it's basically a formula that is then doing everything that those columns did. All right, so then that's your formula there. And in theory, if I drop them in this table, I could come here and just say, right, for this one, give me the, where was it? The cost. Sorry, as a value. Oh, because it's a row label, I've got to do this. Sorry, let me take that out. So for example, over here, if I just say cost, that's a bit weird. Let's just do it as a total card. So that's the sum of the cost. Okay, and if I tick this measure, and where has it gone? Over here somewhere probably. Turn that into a card. It's the same thing. It's the same. It's the
So
same
instead of
answer.
calculating two columns, we just created one measure and we are getting the same result.
Yeah,
And memory is not, compromised. We don't have to do that stuff.
yeah. Because if you add the columns, they're always being calculated on refresh, and they're taking up space in memory when you're building. When people are viewing any page, doesn't really matter what.
Yeah.
Whereas the measure, it just gets triggered when you go to this page, and this page loads, and then that's done.
Yeah.
And then it's not taking up any more resource. And I can slice and dice that by, the cost, and there's the cost broken down by the different animals. So yeah, it's just a way of getting your head around the fact that DAX can do weird things, and then you can actually change the filter using calculate. So calculate is the change filter function. So I could say, right, give me the percent of total. Okay, so, and you can write variables in DAX. This is getting a bit more advanced, but you can write variables. You don't have to do it this way, but you can. So let's say the variable, and I like to use underscore, total animal feed cost equals, okay, calculate, so which means change the filter. When you're working out the cost measure, okay, remove any filter to do with the animal name, okay, which is the animal feed dimension animal. Should have used shorter names. Okay, so that's going to work out the grand total, which is essentially this figure, 222102. That's the cost measure when you don't have any filters for animal. So the total is not filtering for animal. So here we're filtering for animal, here we aren't. Okay, and then I go return. I'll come back to this formula now, result, and I've missed something. What have I missed? Calculate, two brackets. So you should always write your measures like this to make sure you notice where your brackets are. Okay, so I can see there I've missed a little bracket. Oops, sticky keys off. All right, come in here. It's going to freak out a second. Right, I need a close bracket. All right.
Perfect.
Okay, so on its own here, what have I missed? Var. Oh, sorry. I always do this. Var underscore result. Okay, this is just the best way of writing DAX because it just helps you debug stuff and build stuff in little longer DAX formulas.
Right.
Okay. Okay, and var result equals underscore total animal feed cost. All right, so I've just confused everybody by that little way of doing it. It'll make more sense in a second why I've done it that way. All that's doing is removing the filter. I just want to show you what that looks like. So on here, if I click on here and say percent of total, you see every row is the total because all I've done is say remove the filter to do with animal, which is what the total is. Okay, so it's just removed every filter to do with animal. So then if I say, okay, go back to my percent of total and say the result is actually, rather than just the total animal field, the result is to divide, okay, the cost measure by the total animal feed cost, okay, and format that as a percentage. Okay, there we've got, the actual percentages because it's taking that value, the cost measure, and dividing it by this. And that's where DAX is tricky, right?
Yeah.
It's about how you write a measure, how your measure can remove formulas, remove filters, add filters, change filters. That's where the calculate function comes in to change. It's the change filter function. So it's really, it takes a while to get your head around. Okay.
Yeah, but once you get it, so it's really helpful.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I think with this kind of example, audience will understand the importance of learning DAX. So coming back to our conversations on Fabric and Power BI.
Mm.
So want to know a couple of things. So I had one survey with the audience. They wanted to ask couple of things. So first was, what is the roadmap to success in Power BI or analytics field in a longer run? For example, right now we are in 2024. Power BI is useful, but if someone is just moving into this career, what is going to happen? Of course, no one knows what's happening after 3 years, 4 years, but
Yeah.
what's your estimate? What do you think world is going in terms of analytics? Like, if someone learns Power BI end to end, will he or she get a good career prospects, or what do you think, he or she should learn more than just Power BI?
Yeah, I think Power BI is here to stay. It's growing rapidly. Uh, the evolution of, or the event of Fabric and Power BI being all part of that, just opens up even more opportunities, because ultimately Power BI is the pointy end of all this. It's where all these pieces come together. There's no point in having data cleanup, data storage, data, all this sort of stuff, unless you're doing something with that data. And while there will be niche scenarios for machine learning and that sort of stuff, the big end result, the big where all this sort of comes together, is Power BI, and understanding how to build Power BI reports, the concept of sharing them in the right way. What's the best practice around that? What How do you make something more efficient? How do you optimize all this stuff? It's just, and it's got a huge application. Power BI Fabric's quite narrow. Okay, it's at the top end of the pyramid. Excel is out here. Okay,
Yeah.
Excel, if you know Excel, you've got a good chance of a decent job forever. Okay, because basically it's around everywhere. If you're working in organizations, businesses, you're going to get exposed to Excel. And if you're good at Excel, you become indispensable in an organization. Power BI is going that way. Okay, so if you're the Power BI person who's really good at Power BI, then again, you can work in any size organization. They're all going to be using it. That's the way things are going. So Power BI is just much broader. But if you want to focus and you've got more desire about the data engineering side, or you really like Python and notebooks, and you want to go into data science and machine learning, all these things are now accessible via that Fabric environment. And
Yeah.
there will be specialists. Okay, there'll be people who specialize in the data engineering. There'll be people who specialize in data warehousing, as there are today. All Fabric changes is it brings it all under one pricing structure with common data layer to make everything a bit easier for these systems to talk to each other. That's all it changes. But no one person can learn Fabric. All right, it's
Yeah.
just not possible. I'm still learning Excel after 27 years. I'm still learning Power BI after 8 years. I'll be learning notebooks, and bits and pieces, and chipping away. And I'll write notebooks this month that I'll look back in 12 months at and go, gosh, I was so rubbish at notebooks 12 months ago. And that's how you should be. You should always be comparing yourself to yourself last year, not to other people, and not to all the people online. Because if you start comparing yourself to 6 people online, you're just going to feel like
Yeah.
you're not doing anything. Whereas if you compare yourself to one person online, okay, it's a like for like, and maybe they know more DAX and you know more Power Query, or they know more notebooks and you know more this. But if you start comparing yourself to 2 people, well, you're never going to be as good. So don't
Exactly.
compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to yourself. Last year is my attitude.
Right. And one last thing. So it was very interesting. I saw in your profile that you have done a chartered accountancy, and
Hmm.
then you have been working as a finance analyst, right, in multiple companies. So did that help you in designing your career? Like, now you are doing so much in analytics field. So coming from finance background, is it like helping you? Like, what do you think someone should be expert in particular domain and then become good in analytics as well? That is a like complementary skill set.
Yeah, yeah. Sort of. I started off as an auditor, so which is a, or actually, first job was during university was with the finance department, which is where I learned a load of spreadsheet skills. That gave me a little foot up, and I was good at it. I liked it. I automated most of my sort of month-end reporting out of the way by just building processes and macros and stuff to automate that stuff. But it's, I think the path, if you've got exposure to businesses and how businesses need to analyze data and what's important, it really helps you then ask the right questions when you're building reports. Now, we're a consulting firm now, but that analytics space, understanding the organizations and what's important and what's not, and what drives the business, and what's practical and what's theoretical as well. You'll read a lot of theoretical stuff online that this is the ideal world. And then when you work inside an organization, seeing the day-to-day business as usual, it just goes on. People don't have the time necessarily to do learn all the fancy stuff and fancy features. And really, it was a case of just learning that you can just chip away. You can just start automating one process, improving this one little thing. And it's not all of a sudden bring everything in. It's more a case of what can we do now that has a bit of an impact as stage one? Then what can we do next? And then what can we do after it? Rather than just trying to sort of tackle everything in one hit, which is overwhelming. And that's what traditional BI solutions used to do and why they used to fail. That was my experience, was BI solutions used to fail. This 8-month, 12-month implementations of the big business objects type implementations and stuff, is that by the time they were built, it wasn't necessarily what you asked for, or wasn't what you meant when you asked for it, or even if you did need it, then you don't need it now. And this is where our company came in with Excel, is that we built lightweight, rapid reports that lasted 6 months, 12 months. Some are being used 10 years on. But reporting often only needs to be there for 2 months, 3 months. So that's sort of the learning for me, was one, understanding that sort of when people are talking about financial things or operational things, they've got a bit more of an awareness rather than purely coming from a technical point of view.
Yeah.
And the other one is just making stuff that's practical. And how long does it need to live for? How important is this thing? How much energy do you have to spend at it if it's only going to last for 3 months or 6 months? Or if it's going to be business essential, business critical, then how do we, build the processes around it to make it more robust? Often things get over-engineered and too much time and money thrown at things that, just need to get done right now. So that's where Excel and Power BI just changed the game, just in terms of quick analysis and quick report building and flexibility to make a change when things will change in 3 months' time, not have a 3-month turnaround or a 6-month turnaround to get everything moving in a different direction, because everything changes constantly. So it's just, this is sort of the experience I've had.
Amazing. So I think we have touched based on so many concepts today. We started with Power BI, then we talked about Fabric, then we went back to Excel, how Excel is so important, relevant today as well, right? And then we walked through DAX, working on Power Query, and why it is important if you are a Power BI developer, if you're developing the dashboards and all. So yeah, I think we have talked a lot about everything. Any
It's
particular
important.
last words of wisdom from your end to the beginners or early professionals who are moving into this space?
I think just sort of be part of the community. Find your local user group. I run the Power BI meetup group in Perth. We have in-person meetings. We do them online. There's a couple of other really good data meetup groups as well. I was at one last night at Microsoft's office in Perth, but also online, just like places like Twitter. If you just follow the data people on Twitter, you find out lots of stuff. Okay, lots of articles, lots of blog posts, and you can just ignore all the other nonsense that's on there. LinkedIn, if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm on there. But yeah, just start following people. And my other tip is, like, I've got the To-Do app on my phone, Microsoft To Do, and I've got 3 little lists, like to read for Excel, to read for Fabric, and to read for Power BI. And whenever I see a nice article, which I haven't got time to read right then, number one, try and read that one article right then. Otherwise, you probably won't come back to it. Okay, so allocate yourself some time. to read these articles and just do that. Don't get distracted by other stuff. But also, yeah, I just sort of say, I go out on my phone, I say share to my reading list in Fabric, in To Do, and then I pop back to it. I allocate some time just to start reading it, or read it on the train in the morning to work, and those sorts of things. It changes so rapidly that you just got to stay up to date. But start simple. That's my biggest tip. Just start with something simple, a nice little report, grab some data, bring it in. I'll promote my book. If you want to learn Power BI, I've got a book. So aimed at Excel or beginner
that's
people.
amazing. It's on Power Query as well.
Yeah. So it's,
I'll
the
share the
start to
link of
finish.
that book as well if anyone wants to buy it.
Thanks. So, it's just a case of, start and just do something simple and just keep practicing. There's no magic to it. It's just a case of the more effort you put in, the longer you play with it. If you've got a pet project, like you can go, if you're in WA, you can go to your Synergy account, download your Synergy data for your electricity usage, and build a nice dashboard.
Exactly.
Right? I've got solar panels, and I can see the solar panel usage and all this sort of stuff. And it's just, something, just a pet project, and just start playing.
Exactly.
And it's a good way of, if you want to sort of advertise your skills to potential employers, then building a nice portfolio of reports, 2 or 3 reports that look good and have got decent back ends to them as well. Because that's what I would ask if I was interviewing. I would say, right, can you show me the model? Is it a nightmare and it just looks pretty on the front, or is it actually nicely organized? And having a chat about the process and being enthusiastic about this stuff. Then, if you do that, and if it's your passion, and you start sharing back to the community and you start contributing and stuff like this, then it's just a nice sort of feedback loop, and you end up sort of doing a job that you really enjoy, rather than one you're just sort of slaving away at. I think if you're into this tech and you have a bit of a passion for it, then pursue it, because it can be rewarding, and there's a great bunch of people that you learn from. So yeah, it's good.
Right. So as you said, I think it's constantly evolving. So as we see Power BI, the features, they are updated every month, right? So we have to stay updated. Of course, if we are in this field, we have to stay updated. So I think whoever is coming in this field, you have to be, learning constantly. It's not like you have learned, now you're in job, that's it, you're done. No, you have to constantly learn. Even if you're 40 or 50, you have to learn, and that's how it works.
Totally changing. And really try, your employer or whoever, or somebody you're applying for a job with, you should be asking them, how do you support learning? Because if they don't have a plan for you, then you're going to stagnate a little bit and you'll get left behind. So, and it's not really fair to ask people to do all this stuff in their spare time. I'm just a bit nerdy and weird. I like doing this stuff, and it's almost my hobby. But I also, do this stuff in work hours because it's beneficial to me, and it's beneficial to the business, and it's beneficial to our clients. If I keep up to date, everybody benefits. So companies need to be allocating training time and budget, and allowing, and more importantly, if there are employers listening, you've got to allow your staff time to play, mess about, and fail with the new technologies. Because if you want it to be done the same way as it's always been done and nothing ever improves, then great. You're never wasting any money. But you will be, because you won't be adopting the latest technologies. But you've got to let people play with that stuff, and also take 5 times longer to do something this month than they did last month, because they're trying to do it a different, more efficient way eventually. So that's the key for me.
That's amazing. Thanks a lot, Wyn, for sharing your insights on this podcast. It has been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for.
You too.
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you.